back. Today is Memorial Day, so I hope everybody celebrates and has a good time today. Today, I want to talk a little bit about fullness in a quilt. It's something that I see a lot, and it's an easy fix. It's a very easy fix. Um, and when you're quilting on a long arm and you have fullness in a quilt, sometimes it makes it very difficult to get the proper design that you want in a certain area without getting pleats in the quilt. So let's just talk about that for a minute. And mainly it happens in borders, but the um, the fullness starts from the very beginning, and that is squaring up your blocks. So once you get your blocks put together, you need to square them up and make sure that every single block is the same size. And a rule of thumb for me is measure twice, cut once. So, and I always might put a little masking tape on my ruler so I know right where to line up my ruler on the fabric when I'm cutting. So when you're building your quilt, just make sure that you square up all your blocks when you put them together. And that makes the quilt top pretty square. Now, if you're going to be putting a border on your quilt, um, for the most part, I want to talk about that for a few minutes. So if you've got your squares all nice and square and everything is put together and it all looks nice, this is just a simple four patch all put together. But each one of these four patches, they were squared up. So I know that they're nice and even. And when I fold this in half, it actually lines up very nicely. It's a little bit off on one side, but just by maybe an eighth or so an inch. So, okay, so your borders. All right. So when I put on borders, well, for the most part, we and I've done this too. So I'm not perfect. And in the beginning, this is how I thought you did it. I thought you just cut squares and you sewed them together. There was no measuring, no squaring. So, and that's how I made my first few quilts. So with the fullness in it, though, I had a battle with it when I was actually quilting it on my long arm. Most of the time when we're putting on a quilt, we want to take our border and we want to start from one end of the quilt and just sew all the way to the other end. Well, what happens is your either your quilt top or your border is going to end up stretching or shifting, and you could end up what they call dog ears, which is you get a little bit of unevenness when you put your border on. So the best way to do that, first of all, we want to know what the length of our border is. So I take my quilt top and I fold it in half. Now, there is more than one way to find the center of your border. Trust me, this is so you find what works best for you. This works best for me. So I fold my quilt top in half, and um, I take the folded end, and then I take my already cut border. So it doesn't matter if your border is 2 inches, 3 inches, 6 inches. It doesn't matter how big, how wide it is. We're just going to line it up to that folded area. And we're going to lay, and you're going to do this on a flat surface. You're not going to do it like I'm doing. You want to be able to lay it down on a table, make sure that everything lines up. So this lines up perfectly with this edge here of the quilt top. You're going to take it all the way to the other end. I'm losing it. To the other end here. And make sure you're on that fold. Okay, we'll get this sooner or later. All right, so I've taken it all the way to the other end, and as you can see, I have a little bit more, and that's okay. That's what I want. But what I'm going to do now is this is the edge of my quilt top. So I'm going to take a marking tool and I'm going to mark a little dot right at the edge of my border lined up with my quilt top. And I'm going to put a little mark on this end right here. Then I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to cut that. I'm going to cut that off. So that is the measurement that I need for my border. My next step then is after I get my border cut, let's just say I cut this, get my border cut, I'm going to fold it in half. And I'm going to let me grab a couple of pins real quick. I'm going to put a pin, just weave a pin in and out right here. This is my center mark. And then I'm going to take the other end of my border and I'm going to line the raw edge up with the folded end. And now I have another registration mark here. And just weave it in. Okay, so, and my third registration mark for this particular quilt is the end. So I don't need a pin there. So then I'm going to do it to the other side. Get my registration marks on this side right here. Once I get my registration marks on, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take my quilt top and I'm going to fold it in half. And I'm going to put a pin right there because that is my center registration mark. Then I'm going to take one side of the quilt top and I'm going to fold it to the center just like I did my border. And then I'm going to put another pin right there. Okay. And so on. The larger the quilt, the more registration marks you'll need. Now, this doesn't take very long to do. Of course, if you're just putting your border on from here all the way down, yeah, it doesn't take long at all. But the end result of that is it's going to show fullness in the border. And if you have more than one border that you are putting on and you're putting it on that way, your border is going to grow this way, but it's also going to grow this way. Okay, which is going to cause what they call dog ears on your border, which means there's going to be fullness in your border. All right, so I have my registration marks on both my border and my top. And now I'm going to go to the centers of both of those with right sides together. And I'm going to match right here. I'm sorry if I'm not holding this right. Camera situation is not the greatest. So there, I've got a pin there. Pin those two together, the top and the bottom. Well, that really wasn't my center. Here's my center way over here. So let's redo that. I'll get it, trust me. All right, so there we go. We've got those. That's the center. I'm going to pin it. I'm going to make sure that my seams are laying flat in the direction that they're supposed to go into. And then I'm going to match these two here. And then I'm going to pin. And then I'm going to match the edge of it. The edge of the border and the edge of the quilt top. And then I'm going to sew from the center out to the edge on one side, and then I'll do the opposite on the other side. So that is how I put my borders on. Then I'll do the opposite side on the quilt, and then I will take the measurement for the other side of the quilt, for the width of the length of the quilt. So that's how I put my borders on now. And when I first started, like I said, I was in a hurry and I just sewed them on. I didn't really know any better. I've always sewn clothes my whole life, never really got into quilting. So, I thought that's how you did it. And if you don't want the fullness in your quilt, then please start with the center of your quilt top and measure out. Another tip I want to give you is if I don't want to put a border on this particular quilt right here, and I just want it to go as is, because their edge is pieced, or even if you have a pieced border, it's always a good idea to put a basting stitch, about a 1/4 inch basting stitch all the way around, more than likely using a walking foot so there's no pulling and tugging on your quilt top. The more the border is pieced, the more the more the border is pieced, if it's heavily pieced, is what I'm trying to say, is you definitely want to put a stitch around it. If you have mitered piecing especially, or mitered corners, I always will put a 1/4 inch basting stitch around that, just to hold everything in place, because once you put these quilts on a long arm, there's some tugging and a little bit of pulling, and when you're rolling it, it could stretch a little bit. So just a little tip there: baste your edges if they're pieced on your quilt top. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Like and subscribe, and I have a website, Jackie's Machine Quilting. Check it out. Thank you.